Okay, maybe that title was a little bit far-fetched, but think about it. When you think of Spanish expeditions in the New World, particularly involving the conquistadors, you think of Cortez, Pizarro, Coronado, maybe even Narvaez and Cabeza de Vaca if you're weird. But unless you're a decently smelly history nerd, you probably didn't think of De Soto. If you did, I don't want to hear about it. I think the expedition of De Soto is one of the most interesting and underrated colonial exploits in the New World. Underrated? Less spoken on. I don't know. So, since I'm currently working on a much larger video that will hopefully be pretty good, I figured we should talk about one of my favorite historical events. The script is on this, trust me. Should I call this a filler video? Sounds a bit boring. I'll call it a... I'm just gonna call this type of video that. I usually want to make much longer, more in-depth videos, but I find that it makes for some long gaps between content releases, and people are actually giving me Patreon money now, so I feel like I should be putting more stuff out while I'm working on the longer stuff. Why don't you just post shorts? Because I don't like it. Don't worry, I'll still make sure these videos are quality. Also, I would like to thank my patrons. You guys rock. Anyways, let's get into it. The expedition of Hernando de Soto is actually pretty important, and it's sort of remarkable in my opinion that nobody really seems to talk about it. There isn't a ton of literature on the subject. This book at my university library, literally titled The Conquistadors, doesn't even mention it. Luckily, it comes with an inaccurate map of Lake Texcoco as compensation. But granted, not a lot of history books are about anything other than World War II, American Civil War, Revolutionary War, and other things only featuring white people killing each other. The expedition didn't last very long either, only about 4 years, but what it represents is pretty consequential. The expedition of Hernando de Soto represents the end of an era, the end of massive indigenous societies, the end of the era of conquerors in the New World, the end of the conquistador. On top of the consequential aspects of it, it largely set the stage for some very important developments a little bit later on in history. We'll get into that. So let's start here. Spain, 1537. This guy, Hernando de Soto, has just received the Cuban governorship as well as an adelantado from the man himself, Charles the Chin Wonder V. What's an adelantado? Put it lightly, it was the most coveted piece of paper any conquistador could receive. Roughly translating to advance, an adelantado was a royal license to conquer new lands. And who was this De Soto guy? What did he do to deserve such a highly sought-after license? Well, Hernando de Soto was essentially Pizarro's right-hand man in the conquest of the Incan Empire. By the way, I will go into more historical context in my longer videos, but since we're just kind of hanging out, I'm just going to present the narrative while giving the most necessary context. Since 1492, Spain had taken pretty much most of the Americas, except for this chunk here, Eastern North America. There had been one attempt, two if you count Narvaez, to conquer this region. In 1520, Spanish explorers led by Luis Vázquez de Ayllón attempted to set up a colony in South Carolina in an area the captain described to his men as the Garden of Eden, but was just a swamp with a lot of disease-carrying mosquitoes that doomed the expedition from the start. Then the expedition led by Pánfilo de Narvaez, which got blown off course on their way from Cuba to Mexico and landed in Tampa Bay, saw themselves get completely lost, leading to only 4 members of the expedition surviving after traveling all the way across the Gulf Coast over 8 years. One of those survivors was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who wrote his account of the misadventure, presented as a testimony to the crown. Arnold Palmer. In this testimony, given to the crown by Cabeza de Vaca around the same time as Soto's Adelantado, Florida was described as a rich country, which, if you've read anything about his time there, you would know wasn't true in any capacity. Although they had experience in the region, both Cabeza de Vaca and Andrés de Dorantes, another survivor, refused to join De Soto on his trip. They, quote, did not wish to divulge certain things which they had seen, lest someone might beg the government in advance. I have no clue what that means, and apparently nobody else did either. In fact, some of Soto's men told Cabeza de Vaca that they were going just because of his strange words. Doesn't seem very smart. So they were off, leaving from Sanlúcar in April of 1538. Soto, with his great reputation as a brave conqueror, had procured many highly esteemed generals and soldiers. They brought a lot of things, including 800 quintals of biscuit, salt, olive oil, water, wine, and steel and iron for weapons and collars for capturing slaves. They also brought beads for exchange with natives. It's probable that Soto expected to conquer pretty much all of North America. Good luck with that, buddy. The party reached Santiago in Cuba in June. Unfortunately, when they arrived, their flagship, the San Cristobal, hit the shoals of Smith's Key and sank. They lost all of their wine, double unfortunate. When they arrived on the 7th, they partied, eventually leaving on foot to Havana, where they would leave the island for the mainland. De Soto was convinced that this expedition would make him the richest man in the world. So humble. He sent a geographer to the coast of Florida to scout and map it, where he captured 4 natives to be interpreters. These natives, knowing conquistadors were constantly blinded by greed, told him that Florida was just swimming in gold. Naturally, the Spanish believed them and reported the good news back to De Soto. After a long while of logistics and other bureaucratic crap, the expedition finally left for Florida in May of 1539. They landed in a natural harbor they called Bahia del Espiritu Santo, or Bay of the Holy Spirit, what we likely know now as Tampa Bay. When they arrived, the landscape seemed largely deserted aside from a few distant campfire smoke pillars in the distance. Wow, that sentence sucked. After approaching the fires where they saw some huts, things seemed calm. That was until one of their horses got literally one-shot by a Temecula arrow, which was surprising. They then got into a small skirmish, which saw the Temecula flee into the woods and swamps where the horses couldn't follow. Like one shot, like all the way through the body.
Good lord.
Yeah. After a few days, the men were shocked to hear someone shouting to them in Castilian Spanish. It was Juan Ortiz and some of his native allies, a man who had been kidnapped while searching the Florida coast for the lost expedition of Narvaez. Apparently, he was convinced that other Spaniards would never find him, so he went completely native, learning how to use those crazy longbows and even got a bunch of tattoos. This event reflected the luck that Cortez experienced when he found Geronimo de Aguilar on Cozumel, who acted as translator for him before they were gifted Malinali, and Juan Ortiz was able to provide Soto with some pretty crucial information about the social structure and political climate of Florida, which would help in the tried and true Spanish strategy of dividing and conquering. One caveat, Ortiz said there wasn't any gold. To be fair, he apparently hadn't traveled very far outside of his immediate region, but what he did know is that 2 local caciques, or native leaders, were paying tribute to a much more important cacique called Uri Paracosi. Soto then set up a meeting with a local leader named Macoso. I had to literally spell that one out. Macoso didn't really reveal much other than telling them about how much he hated his rivals. Then the conquistadors did that conquistador thing where they got infatuated with rumors that may or may not have been real about a gold-laden, sophisticated society only a few days' travel away. So much so that Soto even wrote a letter to Havana telling of the richness of Florida with its exotic fruits, maize, beans, and many signs of a high society nearby. Coping, I see, Mr. Soto. They would continue their expedition in July. From here, I'm going to go a lot faster, but I'll go over any noteworthy events. They would move slowly through the thick swamps and forests toward Lucca and Ocala, spreading violence and disease. So here, near present-day Gainesville, they would capture 17 warriors and...
Just got some China right there.
And a cacique's daughter to use as bait, which they ended up...
Don't.
Okay. Which ended up with Soto capturing the cacique. Soto got punched in the face by a cacique, which ended up leading to him capturing... And again?
Just keep going.
I kind of can't. You're in the... You
Just
spilled.
Just keep going.
Oh my god, you're getting...
Yeah,
Jesus. are you doing?
My fault. Go ahead. My bad.
Okay, god damn. What? And he had his native allies execute them for doing this, basically. And then they marched to a town called...
Just...
Do you just take those out of your pocket?
No, just go ahead. I'm sorry.
What do you...
Sorry. Go ahead.
You didn't even give me a utensil.
Oh, here. Sorry. Sorry. My bad. Go ahead.
Sorry. They then traveled to a town called Uzachile, where...
To wash it down.
Thanks, Nate.
Gotcha.
Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I'll... Pretty good, actually. Thanks, buddy. I don't know why I need to wash it down. I have milk, but okay. Hire anybody to be your producer and shit like this happens. Somebody's getting fucking fired up. Here, near present-day Gainesville, they captured 17 native warriors and a Kashik's daughter to use as bait, which ended up with Soto capturing the Kashik. Soto got punched in the face by a Kashik and had his native allies execute the captured warriors. They then marched to Uzachile in Apalachee territory, who remembered the Narvaez expedition well enough to take immediate action. As they trudged further north, the Spanish were faced with significant casualties from surprise attacks by the Apalachee, who also practiced scorched earth policy. Eventually, they reached the capital of Enjaica, which had been burned by the remaining 200 or so houses. Which had been burned, and 200 or so houses, which had been burned, and the Spaniards used the 200 or so houses to take refuge. Again, De Soto got caught up in a rumor of a rich civilization just a little further ahead, this time coming from a captured young man who said he was from a rich land called Upaha. When pressed about gold, the kid said there was plenty of it in a place called Cofitachiqui. After waiting out the winter in Enjaica, they left on March 3rd, 1540. Soon after, they reached modern-day Georgia, a much richer region than Florida, where they found an impressive settlement called Toa, which excited Soto. It excited him so much that he left with a small group that same night, reached a town called Ichisi, the Kashik of which pointed him toward a rich lord to the north called Okute. The Spaniards did that really annoying thing where they erected a giant cross in the middle of the town, told the locals to revere it, yada yada. The Spaniards, on their journey, kept finding natives who seemed keen to help them reach Cofitachiqui, whom they all seemed to hate. They were still convinced it was laden in gold and silver, despite natives telling them otherwise, and that it was actually further than 4 days' travel away. What? That made no sense. Wait, go back up, Nate, please.
Oh, actually.
That made no fucking sense. Despite natives telling them otherwise, and that it was actually further than 4 days' travel away, unlike what they thought. But Soto kept listening to that kid they captured, who they named Perico, or Little Peter, and continued... Thanks, dog, you're ruining the shoe. After a week of trudging through thick woods and swamp and seeing no towns or supplies anywhere, Soto threatened to kill Perico until he realized that was probably a bad idea, since he was their only translator in Temecula and Muskogean, the language of their present location, and Perico's probable deceit was blamed on the devil, naturally. Perico even pretended to have convulsions as if he was possessed, and the Spaniards baptized him to drive out the demon. I really feel like that poor kid just wanted to get away from them. They were probably really, really weird. You know, apparently, whenever they would see gold, they would literally froth at the mouth. They get that excited.
You froth at the mouth?
Yes, literally.
Jeez.
On May 1st, Soto saw a woman who he believed was queen of Cofitachiqui near a town called Himahi. Soto was just desperate at this point. His chronicler compared the queen's entrance to that of Cleopatra at Cilicia. By the way, no. But despite her necklace of pearls and the somewhat sophisticated town she ran, Soto still felt there was much to be desired, because there was no gold. The queen brought them some gold, which turned out to be copper, and the silver was just thick boards of mica, or a type of silicate mineral, of which crumbled in their hands. There were a lot of pearls, though. Not that it mattered. I don't really think they cared that much. That's money right there, but no. But hey, I know they've only come across broke and hoeless natives to this point, but our boy Soto remains optimistic. Why? Well, someone mentioned there is yet another rich kingdom 12 days' march away in some place called Chiaja. Soto ordered his men to get ready once again, but by now they were getting kind of frustrated with his irrational decision-making. Some started thinking he was going a bit mental. You don't say. Turns out that the location of Cofitacheki was decently rich and quite strategic, since ships traveling along the Gulf Stream would pass right by it on their way to Europe from the many rich colonies of Spain. So a bit of a missed opportunity. Sucks. Anyways, they left again on May 13th, 15... What you got there, buddy? You got something yummy? They left again on May 13th, taking the queen with them. Now,
I don't like it.
why would I want that?
I didn't like it. Have it.
You took 2 bites out of it.
I didn't like it. I had to make sure. Please, take it.
I already have the cereal. I didn't even finish that.
Please just have it, please. I don't like it, please. I don't like lemon.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Can you try and stay out of the frame now?
Yeah, my bad. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyways, they left again on May 13th, taking the queen with them by force, and they reached the Broad River around May 18th, where the queen escaped. They were in a mountainous region with various plant life, crossing the river on June 5th, entering Chiaja on an island in the river. There was a lot of food there. Everyone was happy, except for Soto, of course, because there was no gold. What a chud. What a chud. They began moving south on the 28th, where they hoped to meet a supply fleet on the coast, hopefully setting up a decent settlement with reinforcements for future expeditions. They entered a kingdom called Koste, whose Kashik beat some of them for looting. Soto pretended to be on his side by beating some of his own men, and pulled a fake out by capturing the Kashik and 12 natives after making friendly relations. He said he was going to burn them for, quote, laying their hands on Christians. But there isn't any record if he did any of that. Oh, guess what? They did it again. They went to a larger kingdom called Kusa and captured the Kashik. This town was great, apparently, and they stayed for over a month. A lot of this video is going to be repeating the same stuff, but it gets good, I promise. They left, went to a walled town called Ulibalahi on August 31st, then a large province called Talisi on September 16th. There they were greeted with ambassadors from Atahachi, sent by the Lord Tuscaloosa. Wait, that sounds good. Let's see where this goes. They arrived in Atahachi on October 10th, where they met Tuscaloosa, who was apparently super tall. So tall, in fact, that the Spanish had him sit on a large pack horse, possibly 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and his feet almost touched the ground. The same thing happened to me the other day. Crazy. Despite being fucking giant and intimidating, Tuscaloosa was kind to the Spaniards, but not too kind. He was in the middle of throwing a party, and when Soto, with his social cues equivalent to that of a 3-year-old, immediately demanded food, servants, and women, Tuscaloosa replied that he wasn't accustomed to serving anyone. Still, Tuscaloosa allowed himself to be arrested and provided the Spanish with 400 of his own men. I keep repeating myself, but it's not my fault, I swear. The same shit just keeps happening. So going further, Tuscaloosa promised the Spaniards that what they desired was just ahead in another town called Mabila. Would you believe it? So they made their way there with the chief arrested. But for some godforsaken reason, they let Andre the Giant here ride on a huge pack horse to Mabila. Why does that matter? Well, as soon as they got there, the Spanish entered a festival in town. Not to participate, mind you, but to gawk at the dancing women. I told you, Chud. So enamored they were with these women that they didn't notice Tuscaloosa flee into a nearby hut where he met with allies to plan an attack. He ordered his men to kill all of the Spaniards. Stunned by libido, the Spanish realized all of the nearby houses were filled with Tuscaloosa's warriors, who suddenly swarmed the streets with weapons, catching the Spaniards completely off guard and off of their horses. Many of the Spanish were killed in the skirmish, with Soto and only a few of his men managing to find horses to fight on. They made it to the gate of the city, only to find the 400 men Tuscaloosa had provided them fleeing their post on the city's outskirts, taking all of the Spanish equipment, clothing, and provisions with them. Despite this setback, Soto had his men surround the city, where another skirmish would commence that lasted until dusk, where the Spanish managed to burn most of the buildings in Mobila and ultimately come out on top. Still, though, it was an extremely costly victory. We don't know what happened to Tuscaloosa, whether he lived or was killed in battle, but we do know his son was killed by Spanish lances, along with most, if not the vast majority, of native warriors that participated. Soto himself lost a nephew and his niece's husband, the very popular and aristocratic Don Carlos Enriquez. That's probably going to make for an awkward Thanksgiving. The road ahead wasn't any more forgiving for the Spanish. Men and horses began dying one after another.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry.
While most of their clothing and equipment, including the pearls that they had acquired from Cofitacheki, basically the only valuable thing that they had acquired so far was lost. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yo. Bro, try that. Oh shit. Try that.
That's it.
It's good.
I'm done. I did.
No, actually, dude.
I can't.
Try that.
Why?
It's good.
This is a professional shoot.
It's good.
You know what? I can't.
No. Oh my god. It's good.
I just need to fucking fire somebody. You.
Me?
Yes, you. What the fuck? Get out of my studio. You're fired.
What did I do, man?
Good job, buddy. You squandered the best gig you've ever had. You motherfucker.
That was a little much, dude. You probably shouldn't have fired him
Says
like that.
you.
What?
You have made this shoot an absolute goddamn nightmare.
What did I even do?
Everything.
I just gave you snacks.
You made everything bad happen. This was going just fine. You see how shaky the camera is now? We don't have a cameraman anymore. It's just floating there. I killed him. He's dead.
That's my fault.
Yeah, if you don't want that same shit to happen to you, you better wise the fuck up. If you weren't my sister's kid, you be out of here. You be done. You understand?
I was just giving you fucking...
I don't even like mini wheats.
Oh, you looked hungry. Just a long video.
I'm allergic to banana.
I didn't know that. That's...
You know what? We need to finish this, so I don't know.
Oh, can I be cameraman? Since we don't have one.
On account of the death of a coworker, sure.
Yes! Oh my god, bro, thank you. Yes. I won't let you down, mister, in time. I got you. Give me 1 second.
The road ahead wasn't any more forgiving for the Spanish. Men and horses began dying one after another, while most of their clothing and equipment, including the pearls they had acquired from Cofitacheki, basically the only valuable thing they had acquired so far, was all lost. So let's take a second. What would you do in this situation? Would you continue to the coast and meet up with the boats you had ordered to be there by now, which was already the plan? Makes sense. You've lost most of your men and are stampeding toward a grisly death. Well, don't forget who we're dealing with here. This was 16th century Spain. Everything was built on reputation and glory. So instead of making the reasonable decision, Soto sat down and thought of his fellow Spaniards ridiculing and teasing him about his failed expedition. Blushing, he made a decision. He said, "No, we shall not make the only logical decision for survival here in the middle of fucking nowhere. And our only advantages over the native peoples have pretty much vanished, but we are Spaniards. We have smallpox and we cannot read. We are going to go back inland."
Well, why would we do that?
Because I'm just kind of a prick like that.
Oh.
Also Jesus. Yeah, I decided to go back inland in a last-ditch effort to find literally anything valuable. So after gathering what little strength they had left, Soto and his men began traveling northwest. Guess what though? Snow! Lol.
Snow! Lol.
This particularly sucked since most of them had no armor and were wearing torn native clothes with no shoes or headwear. They entered a small town. Nothing was there. Whoops. They found another town where all of the natives had taken literally all of their food and crossed a river with it, basically daring the Spanish to cross. They surprisingly managed to build a small vessel in 4 days and made their way across, where they managed to find some food. Then they fed their waning herd of pigs, which will be important later, so stick around. Subscribe to my Patreon to see me shirtless too. Here's Nate and I playing Fortnite.
Yeah! 67! 67!
And then I show the 67!
67!
At this point, our European friends are just on the border of Mississippi and Alabama. They found another town, staying there for the winter, which lasted until March. When they were ready to leave, they found themselves surrounded by native warriors who could have literally just killed all of them, but for some reason retreated, allowing the Spanish to get a horse and kill most of them about a week later. Further northwest, after swimming across a swamp, they managed to seize a town called Quizquiz. I think that's how that's said, which I love the name of. My firstborn child will be named Quizquiz Montezuma Cabeza de Vaca, and they shall be president in 2068. I was really tired when I wrote this. Here's something cool, actually. They reached the Mississippi only a few miles from Quizquiz, where they saw many well-made vessels that seemed to them like, quote, a fleet of beautiful galleys. Each vessel carried thousands of warriors. Instead of being scared shitless like sane people, Soto saw this as a good omen that they were reaching some highly coveted city that would make him legendary. His Tenochtitlan of the American South, if you will. Bad news, buddy. That's over here. Over the next month, they built enough of their own vessels to carry themselves across the river, crossing on the night of June 17th, 1541. Soon after, they found a very fertile and heavily populated area near a town called Casqui, where the Cacique wanted to be friends with the Spaniards. Guys, how do we keep making this mistake? Is there not an indigenous American South Cacique group chat where someone could send a message in telling them not to trust these people? The Cacique of Casqui wanted help fighting its rival, the town of Pacacha, which he promised Soto had plenty of gold. Putting his tongue back in his mouth after panting incessantly, Soto agreed to help. They made it to Pacacha on June 29th, and this keeps happening. It's getting funny, but Pacacha had anticipated the attack, and so nobody was there. Oh, and there was no gold. Thankfully, I guess. The Spaniards found lots of skins and blankets to make actual clothes out of. While they stayed here for a month and scouted the area, Soto thought they were close to the South Sea or the Pacific Ocean. Surprisingly, not a terrible assumption, since the longitude of Pacacha is about the same as the Pacific coast off of Nicaragua. We're almost done, I promise. I got my wisdom teeth out recently. Here's me right after. Subscribe? By now they're in modern day Arkansas, or as I like to call it, Pirate Kansas. They reached a town called Quiguate on August 5th, couldn't recruit anyone to exploit, and left on the 26th going northwest. Fernando Cervantes believes they continued this way in hopes of finding the Pacific, but unfortunately they just found more swamps. They seized a town called Caligua on September 4th and took their food. Then a few days later, they finally decided to head south from a nearby town called Calpista, leaving the woodsy Ozarks toward the Arkansas River Valley. They came across tilled fields and small villages in Cayas, halting on the 15th in Tanico. Here they chilled out until can't believe I'm saying this again, Soto was told about yet another rich province to the northwest, which, of course, he had to investigate. I really do think the natives were just keeping the Spanish. They kept telling him about other nearby rich places to make him go away. You'd think they would have taken the hint. On their way northwest, they were attacked brutally. 10 horses and 8 Spaniards were wounded. According to the chronicler Rodrigo Rangel, the natives used long poles like lances that were fire-hardened at the end, which they apparently used to hunt buffalo. So that's cool. Apparently, they were just the absolute worst people to run into in the Spaniards' condition. They were the fiercest warriors they had met so far and spoke a language completely foreign to any of their interpreters. They also lived on super flat land with nothing on it, barely any vegetation, so they were hunter-gatherers. Oh, by the way, they didn't find the Pacific. Now, finally, Soto decided in his brightest moment that there was no point in continuing further west. They were surrounded by either marshes, mountains, or arid plains. There was nothing to the east, so the only reasonable option was to head south. They began their southern march to the Gulf again in mid-April. Soto halted at a town called Guacoya. Here, deeply depressed, he fell ill and became bedridden. He even named a successor, Luis de Moscoso, and asked his men to forgive any offense that they may have received from him. Then, a fever spiked, and a few days later on May 21st, 1522, the, quote, magnanimous and unconquered knight gave his soul to God and died at the age of 42, a Catholic Christian, having asked, quote, for the mercy of the Blessed Trinity and invoked the help of the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, the intercession of the Virgin of all the celestial court in the faith of the Roman Church. Damn. That was actually kind of sad. Psych! Fuck you, Soto! NBA highlights. Soto dying of what appears to have been a broken heart sort of complicated things for the other expedition members, not only because their captain was dead, but also because they had apparently convinced the local native peoples that Soto was the, quote, son of the sun, who basically couldn't die. So when he in fact died, the Spaniards had to save face. They told the locals that his body had risen into the sky and disappeared, but they actually buried him at night. Then, this is hilarious, the natives started getting suspicious of the spot they had buried him. I guess it was obvious they had buried someone there, so they dug him back up at night and carried his body into the Mississippi River, where they dumped it. There's a pretty cool painting of it, actually. As for the expedition members still alive, they managed to create barges and get to safety in Mexico after a year of trying to walk back on foot. They were fine. So, here's why I think the expedition needs more recognition. Yes, Soto basically did absolutely nothing to help Spain here, but what this event lacked in immediate consequences had been made up for by what happened not too soon after. The expedition of Hernando de Soto had possibly some of the most consequential political, social, and environmental effects of any Spanish expedition in the New World. So let's start here with the lighter stuff. If you live in the US, especially the East Coast, you likely know about the rampant feral hog problem that is devastating ecosystems across the country. Feral hogs feed on shrubs, roots, basically anything they can get their hands on. They're particularly good at digging, like how humans use them to find and dig up truffles, which are overrated as hell. They have a very good sense of smell, which is expected with that snoot. They are very efficient at digging up and eating things like acorns, which doesn't allow new saplings to sprout. Along with a myriad of other harmful issues, feral hogs in the US are actively destroying ecosystems and their processes. You can even legally hunt them here in California.
Alright, but who cares though? Since when is this a swine science channel, bro?
Since I got my hands on your mom, Nate.
Alright, bro.
Now quiet down. No rations for you tonight.
Alright, bro. You know what, bro?
Yeah. Yeah, but anyways. Remember earlier how I mentioned that the piglets the Spaniards brought with them would come back into play later? Well, the very first feral hog populations were introduced to the American mainland from the De Soto expedition. So if you needed any more reason to hate those conquistador characters, they're technically responsible for terrible ecosystem damage in the US. There were also many horses that escaped that led to some of the first herds of wild horses in the region. If I had a horse, I would name it Emmanuel. Another far more impactful Another far more impactful yet unintended side effect of the De Soto expedition was this. As the Spanish traveled all along the American South, they became the first Europeans to come into contact with these innumerable numbers of indigenous peoples. Innumerable numbers. All new numbers. Okay? These cultures are now known as Mississippian societies. They were highly advanced in agriculture and had complex social systems. Mostly fragmented remnants of the larger city-states of the centuries before, like Cahokia, these cultures were huge and highly populated. The Spaniards said the lands around the Mississippi entering Arkansas were, quote, thickly set with great towns, with 2 or 3 of them to be seen from one. These cities had earthen walls, large moats, and incredibly skilled warriors who wore, quote, plumes of many colors, having feathered shields in their hands, and covered in red ochre. You remember those boats on the Mississippi the Spanish saw that were filled with thousands of warriors? That was commonplace along the Great River. Highly advanced societies who had mastered everything they possibly could. These cultures got absolutely zero recognition, and especially now, and that is very disappointing. They were powerhouses, the most fierce and powerful people north of Mexico. That was, until the Spanish arrived. What were the Spanish best at? Spreading diseases. Although Soto and his men didn't stick around long enough to see it, the effects of diseases completely destroyed these highly populated societies in almost every place the Spanish visited. I guess the De Soto expedition wasn't exactly inspiring to other Europeans, understandably, as no Europeans would visit this part of the Mississippi Valley for more than a century. And according to my GOAT, Charles C. Mann, quote, early in 1682, foreigners appeared again, this time Frenchmen in canoes. In one seat was a man named René La Salle. La Salle passed through the area which De Soto had found cities cheek by jowl. It was deserted. The French didn't see an Indian village for 200 miles. About 50 settlements existed in this strip of the Mississippi when De Soto showed up, according to Anne Ramanovsky, an archaeologist at the University of New Mexico. By La Salle's time, the number had shrunk to perhaps 10, some probably inhabited by recent immigrants. Among some groups in particular, there was a death rate of up to 96%. The Caddo people dropped from an estimated 200,000 people to only around 8,500 and 1,400 in the 1700s. Charles Mann said that's equivalent to wiping New York City's population down to 56,000, not even enough to fill Yankee Stadium. In many ways, the members of the De Soto expedition were privileged to see these societies as they were. No one else in recorded history would ever have the opportunity again. The door was opened and slammed shut by this fruitless venture. These incredible cultures vanished in a historical instant, never to be even conceived of again. This actually makes me very upset. Today, most historians believe disease was the main culprit, but not from the Spanish possibly. It was likely that the 300 pigs that tagged along, although that is theoretical, were the ones who spread the disease. The force of men was probably too small to have any serious impact disease-wise, and it would have likely burned through his 600 men before they even reached the Mississippi. The common conception of all Native Americans as nomadic hunters stems from this. There was nothing else. The highly urbanized and complicated societies that existed were wiped off the face of the earth. They had no other choice. As soon as the Spanish arrived, the archaeological record shows a startling jump in the number of mass graves in the American South. This is, of course, not letting Soto and his men off the hook. As Soto spent more and more time finding absolutely nothing, he started going a bit mental, becoming increasingly brutal in his actions, burning entire villages and agriculture areas simply out of spite, while massacring native peoples for not having what he desired, gold, an item which, to them, held little importance. To go even further, the fragmenting of these societies left a massive power vacuum in the region, which would play into European hands when the English arrived in the Carolinas. Go check out my video on malaria for a bit more on this at this timestamp, 1 hour and 5 seconds. This video went from laughing at Spanish incompetence to realizing the real loss that occurred. It's fascinating how much this completely failed expedition really did, and the Spanish had no idea about it. An unintentional genocide. Here's where I think I'll wrap this up. I'm sorry to bum you out at the end there, but it's important information to know. Go check out Conquistadors by Fernando Cervantes and 1491 by Charles Mann. They're two of my favorite books ever. Subscribe if you'd like. I highly suggest it. I'm currently working on a much longer and more in-depth video on a similar subject, so I hope you enjoyed this little content care package in between. Thank you to my patrons. You guys totally rock. Go ahead, check it out if you're feeling froggy. Anywho, I'm Austin in Time, and I have Crohn's disease.